order to get us into the Victorian period, it is important to have a very quick look, into what led up to the way the Victorians viewed science, viewed critical thinking, and would also view spiritualism. This is part 2 of the history of debunking. In the 1700s was a period known as the Enlightenment. It's a very complicated period, and it involves nearly every aspect of society. But for the purposes of this video, I can sum up what we need to know in 3 pictures, and they're all by the same artist, done over the series of a few years, in the 1700s. His name was Joseph Wright of Derby, and his 3 pictures look at the development of science and the growing importance of science in the 1700s. The first picture is called A Philosopher Lecturing on the Orrery, and it was painted in 1766. Scientists and philosophers almost became celebrities in the 1700s. Science began to make way alongside, and in some cases against, religion. This first picture shows a philosopher with a 3D model of the solar system. It's brightly lit, and his audience is looking in wide-eyed wonder at what they are being told and what they are being shown. Science at this point is a marvel. It is new to a lot of people, and scientists would stretch their experimentation, their knowledge, as far as possible during the Enlightenment. Just 2 years later, in 1768, the next picture is called An Experiment on a Bird in the Air Pump. This picture takes a darker turn, and this type of experiment was used quite a bit. It seems obvious to us now, but scientists were looking at the idea that we and all creatures need oxygen to breathe. We need air to breathe. So this is the type of experiment that some scientists would do. And again, it's being done almost as a sideshow, to show people what science is actually doing, how science actually works. And what you are looking at is a scientist with a much more threatening face. In front of him is a stand with a glass globe on the top. Inside the glass globe is a bird. The globe is sealed. And so what's happening is you're looking at the audience looking distressed, looking away, when they realise what's actually happening to the bird is the bird is dying. This is science really starting to push the boundaries. This is science looking at not taking care of what they should be doing in order to get the knowledge. This will be a major theme in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in the early 1800s, which I mentioned in episode 1. The idea of a scientist playing God, the idea of a scientist being so thirsty for knowledge, they don't care who they hurt. The third picture is called The Alchemist in Search of the Philosopher's Stone, and is the final of these 3 paintings, and it was painted in 1771. So this is a space of 5 years. This is a space of wonderment at what science can show, to distress at how far science is pushing the boundaries. But what we see in this picture is a coming together again of spiritualism and science. This is an alchemist experimenting with phosphorus. Phosphorus gives off a glow. And so the whole painting has a very religious feel to it. The alchemist is bending in worship at the science, basking in the glow, but almost as though it's a new form of enlightenment. That science and religion, science and spirituality do not have to be separate. When I was asked to look at the history of debunking, the reason I have gone so far back in producing this series, when I was doing my research, I saw how many similarities there were between now and the Victorian period. We have debunkers who look at fake videos to see how the tricks are being performed to fool people into thinking those videos are real. It's simple. Same thing happened in the Victorian period. And episode 3 of this series will take a closer look at that. We'll be taking a closer look at people who perform seances, for example, table tipping, talking to the dead, and those who sought to expose that kind of trickery and fraud. It's important to understand just how much we are influenced by the Victorians. And believe it or not, there are a lot of similarities now, especially in the way we view the paranormal. The Victorians are hugely influential on the 20th and even 21st century. This is what happens with history. It doesn't happen in a bubble. We are affected by what comes before. So as the Victorians were affected by the Enlightenment in the previous century, we are affected by the Victorians. And there are a lot of similarities. We have developed the same interest and awe and thrill at looking at subjects within the paranormal. A lot of the iconic imagery that we associate with the paranormal, whether it's everything from witches to ghosts to seances, it all is impacted upon by the Victorian period. And in the same way that we do now, again, which I mentioned in episode 1 when I was talking about time of production, how any horror movie we watch now is reflecting the fears, the anxieties that we have now. The same thing happened with the Victorians. So I'm going to have a look at why the Victorians became obsessed with the paranormal and the supernatural, and how that affected both day-to-day life and their popular culture. That final picture by Joseph Wright of Derby with the alchemist in awe, spiritual awe of the glow from the phosphorus, would lead on to a way a lot of the Victorians would see science. They wouldn't see it all the time as logic and proof and separate from their paranormal and spiritual beliefs. They often saw it being part and parcel of the same thing. Some of the inventions and scientific discoveries of the Victorian period were used in order to talk about the paranormal, to create artwork and stories about the paranormal. For example, the rise of the printing press, magazines for the masses, books for the masses. People are more educated in the Victorian period, and eventually will rise to seances and having the ability to perform trickery, whether it's with photography, whether it's with mechanicals. Science will, ironically, and the Industrial Revolution and inventions will help fakery to exist. It was a very sudden rise in science and technology in the Victorian period. Increase in factory production through mechanisation, increase in travel, trains, steamships. If you look at Victorian inventions, there are some amazing inventions that we don't even use now, but the actual time and effort put into these things, put into the development of the early development of the radio, of the car, the telephone, developments in medicine in the 18th century. You've got major writers such as H.G. Wells and Jules Verne imagining what could happen in the future with all of this technology. Journeys to the moon were considered, flight was considered, and the Victorians were very often in awe of the actual rapid progression of science in their lifetime. And that's no different to now. We have our own awe and wonder and fear of the development of technology now, particularly in the use of things like AI. We're not so different from the Victorians as we think we are. So what is spiritualism? From Britannica, the definitions of spiritualism are split into two. One is in terms of philosophy, believing spiritualism as a characteristic of any system of thought that affirms the existence of immaterial reality imperceptible to the senses, that which we cannot see but is actually there. In religion, spiritualism is a movement based on the belief that departed souls can interact with the living. Spiritualists sought contact with the dead through the assistance of a medium. For the most part, a person believed to have the ability to contact spirits directly. In our paranormal investigations today, we look at both of these things, most commonly in terms of YouTube videos and in what the investigations and hunting the debunkers look at, we're looking at the second one. We are looking at those who walk into a location and automatically assume that any, in quotation marks, evidence they get is contact with the dead. The spiritualist movement and the attempt to contact the dead was very, very popular in the Victorian era. And it attracted people from all walks of life, all different classes. Queen Victoria was fascinated by anything supernatural, and the Victorians equally fascinated anything supernatural, otherworldly, or occult. A lot of the beliefs and fascinations of the Victorian period are echoed today in our search for proof of the paranormal. The rise in interest in the paranormal, the rise in interest in spiritualism, was accelerated by the Victorians' obsession with death. They had what is called their own death culture. They had a lot of rituals and etiquette for dealing with death. One of the reasons for this is death was so abundant in the Victorian era. Modern medicine had not progressed enough for people to live to old age. Many people died at home, so death would be more readily witnessed in the Victorian era than it would be now. To add to this, you are dealing with an era where the monarch, Queen Victoria, is very much a figurehead of the country. She lost her husband, Prince Albert, when he was only 42. She continued to wear black for 40 years, therefore influencing the population in general with the culture of mourning and respecting death. It would also be part of the Victorian tendency to try and hold on to as much of a passed away loved one as possible. Belongings, wearing black for sometimes 2 years, even in the general population, especially amongst women. And, as we now know, and we sometimes see in ghost investigations in older properties, the Victorians would actually take photos, the Victorians would have what are called death photos. They would take pictures of people deceased and would prop them up in such a way that it would look as though they were still alive to have one last picture of their loved ones. Victorian funerals were very elaborate affairs. If you could afford it, the bigger the funeral, the better. The bigger the funeral, the more that you were showing that you loved the person who had passed away. Due to the rise in technology and transportation, and therefore an increasing mortality rate through accidents, one of the things that the Victorians developed was an obsession over preventing someone being buried alive. They were very, very fearful of this. And so the dead were often kept around for a lot longer than they are now, and were put on what is called a death watch to make sure that the person was actually dead before they were buried. So you are dealing with a culture that in one way or another is around death for far more than we are now. As well as the photographs, death masks and portraits of the recently deceased were also produced, as well as jewellery that utilised a locket of the dead person's hair. Although this can now appear morbid to us, what this actually showed the Victorians had was a recognition that death was part of everyday life. They were very open about their understanding of loss and of grief. With the expansion in science and technology, this was a very worrying time for some Victorians. So often the rituals behind death gave a very nostalgic and grounding link to the past, a past that they were more certain of, rather than a future that could hold anything. In many ways, I would argue that we do the same thing now. We love watching horror movies, we love watching ghost stories, we love watching people go into old buildings, old locations, historical sites, and investigate the paranormal in an attempt to talk to the dead. It is not a lot different from the Victorian era. And I would argue that one of the reasons we do this is in this tumultuous time, both globally in terms of science, in terms of AI, in terms of just everything that's going on. We grasp onto that link to the past. We grasp on for answers, whatever those answers are. Somehow, I believe a belief in the paranormal, and I believe in the paranormal, can be an attempt to keep us grounded in our history, to keep us grounded in what we know of our own world. When technology leaps forward, as it has been doing for the past 20 or so years, it makes us nervous. Yes, it's wonderful. Yes, all the gadgets we have, all of the things that we use, including what I'm using now. I'm using software to be able to put a video onto the internet which can be seen worldwide. This was unheard of only a few short years ago. And it's wonderful, but it's also frightening. The use of AI is frightening. The use of what technology can do is frightening. We are back to the Victorian fears of technology replacing us in our jobs. We are with the fear that AI will start to think for us. That we are at the fear that AI may take over. We are at the fear of what science will push the boundaries so far. And we've had this in the 20th century with the development of the hydrogen bomb, of how technology could possibly destroy us, and we're now going through that with AI. So, in my opinion, concentrating on something like paranormal investigation, where people are going into old properties, where people are looking at historical documents, it reminds us where we came from. It reminds us who we are. And maybe for some people, it reminds us who we'd like still to be, despite everything going bananas, despite the expansion of technology and science and discoveries. We need that history to keep our feet on the ground. It's important to note that spiritualists in the Victorian era, although it looked like and was an obsession with death and grief and loss, it was also a time of optimism. It was a time to be curious about what happens when we pass away. A lot of people who were involved in spiritualism saw themselves as being at the start of some new enlightenment. Their thirst for the supernatural, their belief in the paranormal, their investigations and research into the paranormal started a trend that we still see today. We still see it in the ghost investigations. We still see it in paranormal investigations, in paranormal research. Whether it's paranormal research about what's happening now, what happened 100 years ago, or what happened thousands of years in the past. We have retained that love of the search for the truth, one way or the other, whether it's proven by science or whether it's debunked, whether we eventually get some solid proof of the paranormal. In some ways, and I keep saying this, it doesn't matter. It's about the search. It's about the thirst for knowledge. It's about the love of looking backwards and forwards and what's happening now. We can view the paranormal with a skeptical eye. We can view the paranormal with a believer's eye. But it would be nice to see it taken seriously one way or the other. The fact that people are still going out investigating, the fact that people like myself are researching, whether people are looking to disprove it, to prove it, it is still an area of study. It's an important area of study, in my opinion. But like the Victorian period, what we're seeing now is, and this will be in the next episode, what generally happens with this sort of subject matter is there's always going to be people who are going to take advantage of the belief systems and of the search for what happens after we pass away.